Hey, it's Mr. W, and welcome to the AP Bio Show. I am so happy to have you here, and I'm really honored that you're spending your time with me tonight. So, the AP Bio Show, let's talk about what it's all about. The AP Bio Show is designed for people who are studying biology, and that means AP Biology, IB Biology, or college level biology. So, on the show tonight, we're going to talk about adaptation. And that is going to involve looking at the evolution of camouflage coloration in the rock pocket mouse. It's going to involve a song, the Peppered Moth. And I'll tell you why we're going to have some music in just a minute. And then there's going to be some other things, a weekly quiz. We'll have some time for your questions, and I'll give you some tips about learning. I want to start by welcoming you to biology. My guess is that those of you who are watching are about to start on a great journey. And that journey is a biology course that's either at the AP, IB, or college level. If you're in a high school biology course, you're going to enjoy this show too, but we'll hit on some topics that might not be in your curriculum. So biology is an incredible subject. I've been learning about it and loving it for my entire adult life. And you will learn so much in your biology course. It's going to change your perspective. It's going to change the way that you think about yourself, how you fit into this universe, both in terms of space and of time. Life is an incredible pageant, and that's what we study in biology, biology. This course is going to be mostly oriented towards AP biology. But again, if you're at a college class or if you're taking IB bio, you will learn so much. And so much of the curriculum that we'll cover here will also be covered in your class. What we're going to do is we're going to start this week with an overview of the number one topic of biology, which is evolution and natural selection. Starting next week, we'll be looking at the chemistry of life, the first topic in most biology classes. We'll follow that by looking at cell structure and function. That'll be followed by cellular energetics, incredible processes like cellular respiration and photosynthesis. We'll follow that by looking at how cells communicate with one another, processes that are associated with feedback and homeostasis. We'll look at how cell communication is related to cancer and also programmed cell death. We'll then turn to heredity, the incredible thing that explains how you are like your parents, but not exactly like them, how you are similar to your siblings, but different from them as well, how genes get passed from one generation to the next. We'll then turn to how inheritance works on a molecular level. We'll look at DNA, the double helix, and how it controls the expression of certain proteins within cells. That'll lead us to the study of evolution, how things have changed over time, and then we'll see how everything fits together with the study of ecology. Assuming that you're in a biology class, you know that there are going to be midterms and there are going to be finals along the way, and we'll help you out with that as well. The goal is for you to succeed in your biology class. So very, very happy to have you here with me tonight. I want to introduce myself. My name is Glenn Wolkenfeld, also known as Mr. W to my students, but you're my students now because I am a recently retired high school teacher. In fact, today marks 1 year since I stopped teaching. School started today in my home district, and I'm not there. Instead of where am I? I'm here with you. When I taught AP Biology, I had a lot of success. About 70% of my students got 4s and 5s on the AP Bio exam, and I'm hoping that I can guide you to similar levels of success. Part of the reason why I feel confident that I can do that is because I'm also the creator of a website, a learning system called learn-biology.com. It's an online interactive AP biology curriculum, and I'll tell you more about it a little bit later in the show, but just know that if you're looking for additional support in learning biology, then Learn-Biology is the solution that you're looking for. If you're a teacher, we have we have subscriptions that teachers can get that they can use with all their students, and you can sign up for a free trial. I'm also the creator of the Biomania AP Bio app, available on iOS and Android. It's got a lot of the content that's on learn-biology.com. It puts biology in your pocket and sets you up for success. To tell you a little bit about this show and what will be happening throughout the year, we're going to have the AP Bio show on Wednesdays. It'll go from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. PST. I know that that's a little bit early for some folks in California, Washington, and Oregon, and it's going to be a little bit late for folks who are on the East Coast, but that seems to be the happy medium that really will work out. The typical segments will be things like a lesson of the week. I'll talk about biology in the news, though I'm not going to do that this week because I'm spending all this time setting up the show. There'll be a song of the week. There's going to be a biology quiz. I'll spend some time answering your questions, and we'll talk about how you can crush it in your biology class, both through general study techniques, but also using learn-biology.com. I want to emphasize that one thing that I love about this medium, about YouTube Live, is that it's interactive. So along the way, if you have questions, please put them in the comments, and I'll pause from time to time and we'll address them. There'll be a moment in the show when we'll stop and we'll just open it up to any questions. So, I know that you have a lot of choices about how you spend your time, and I really admire those of you who are here watching and learning some biology right now. So let's get into our lesson of the week. The lesson of the week is going to be about understanding adaptation and natural selection through looking at rock pocket mouse evolution. The rock pocket mouse is a well-studied organism, and because of that, we understand how it developed the adaptations that it has right down to a cellular and molecular level. And I'll talk about the rock pocket mouse from time to time throughout this course, throughout our Wednesday meetings, but it seemed that in terms of getting a good introduction to biology, this would be a great way to start. What's an adaptation? An adaptation is the process by which a population becomes better suited to its environment. Now, you might have heard of another definition of the word adaptation that's equally valid, which is how individuals adapt to their environment. So like, for example, I live at sea level. If I moved to some place like Denver, Colorado, and I was a mile high, my body would adapt to the different level of oxygen in the air. That's an adaptation, but that's really not what we're focused on today. What we're really focused on is how a population changes over time by evolving new adaptations and how those become fixed and widespread throughout the population. So like, for example, if you were lucky enough to go scuba diving, or if you had a really cool aquarium, you might see a creature like this. It's the leafy sea dragon, and it's a kind of seahorse. And the leafy sea dragon, which I'm going to give you a better view of by going like this. Nope. About this one. Perfect. Okay. The leafy sea dragon, you see that it has all these fleshy appendages coming off of its body. Well, what's that all about? The leafy sea dragon lives in kelp forests. So as with the adaptation that we're going to talk about tonight, this is a camouflage adaptation. And having these appendages that look like kelp actually enable the leafy sea dragon to blend in with its environment. It makes it less likely to be caught by its predators. Here's another adaptation. This is an adaptation that involves the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. So this is a vastly magnified picture of the SARS virus. On the outside of the SARS virus are these little spike proteins, and it's the presence of all of these that make this into a coronavirus. Now, here's the thing. This spike protein, which is shown over here in a very enlarged 3D model, has a very specific shape, and that specific shape enables the spike protein to bind with a molecule. It's called the ACE enzyme that's on the surface of our epithelial tissues, and when it binds, spike protein binds with ACE, it essentially induces ACE to cause the membrane to buckle and to invite the SARS virus into the cell, where it then replicates and ultimately destroys the cell and can have really bad effects upon human beings and human health, as we know from the pandemic, which of course is still going on. It's still going on right now. And this is an evolved adaptation. The SARS virus was unable to bind with that receptor for who knows how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. There are other forms of SARS that were able to, but this form was unable to bind until it developed a mutation that changed the shape that enabled it to bind perfectly with that receptor. That's an adaptation. It's an adaptation for the virus. It was a disaster for us. How do adaptations come about? That's really what we're going to address tonight. Here's a bat. And there are so many adaptations. For example, the whole forelimb structure, that's an adaptation. It's a modification of a basic vertebrate forelimb. In other words, this bone corresponds to this bone. These two bones over here correspond to our radius and our ulna. And these correspond to certain kinds of finger bones, but they've been modified in bats to adapt it for flying. How do adaptations like that come about? The ears, the sound that these bats can produce, enable it to do something called sonar. It emits these clicks of high frequency sound. They bounce off objects. They bounce back into the bat's ears. The ears can then send messages to the brain, which can then compute a vector for where a moth is flying, enabling a bat to capture a moth while hunting on the wing. Essentially, a level of acuity with sound that matches the level of acuity that we have with vision. Quite extraordinary. That's an adaptation. So, what we're going to look at tonight in depth is an adaptation that's a little bit more humble than the incredible wings of a bat, but it's remarkable nevertheless. And what's remarkable is how well we can understand it. This is camouflage coloration in the rock pocket mouse. And here's what you need to know about this mouse. It lives in the southwestern states of the United States, and that includes Arizona, New Mexico. It also lives in the northern regions of Mexico on the southern border. And there are two forms. There's a light form and a dark form. The light form is found predominantly in light-colored habitats, whereas the dark form is found on darker habitats. Now, what you need to know a little bit about is the geology. And the geology is that these regions that are dark because of lava that relatively recently flowed into these areas. Now, I'm going to set myself a little bit over to the side so you can see a little bit better, like that. And you can see that here are these extensive areas with lava flows. What does recent mean geologically? It might mean 1 million years ago, or 100,000 years ago, or several hundred years ago. But the lava's cooled. It's now just dark rock. And on that dark rock, there are plenty of plants that are living. So it's potential habitat where a mouse could find food. But there's a problem. And the problem is that there are many visual predators. And what I mean by that is predators that hunt by sight, like hawks and owls and snakes, though rattlesnakes can also sort of detect heat, but they've got to know where an animal is. And you can see that a light-colored mouse on this light rocky substrate is relatively well camouflaged. But if it's on the dark substrate, it's literally food that's just waiting to be eaten by these visual predators. And conversely, the dark colored mice on the dark rock is well camouflaged. But put that dark mouse on light colored rock, it's in big trouble because it'll be seen by an owl, by a hawk, by a snake. So the color of these mice is an adaptation. It's a feature that's promoting survival and reproduction. How did this adaptation come about? Well, fur color results from a pigment that's called melanin. we have that pigment too. It's responsible for skin color in human beings. Here's a structural formula of one form of melanin, and here's a structural formula of another kind of melanin. So where is melanin from? It's produced by cells that are called melanocytes. And melanocytes are one of many cells that make up the tissue that makes up skin. And the structure of mouse skin is pretty much identical to the structure of human skin. There are multiple layers. And again, the thing to know is that we have these cells that are producing pigments, and the kind of pigment can change. Melanocytes, these melanin-producing cells, have receptors, and those receptors respond to signals. So here's a single melanocyte, very schematically drawn. And here's a receptor on the surface of the cell. This would be the membrane of the cell. This would be the cytoplasm. There would be the nucleus somewhere in here. And we'll get into all the details of how different cells work. But the thing to know for now is that in response to a signal, a hormonal signal, this receptor will induce changes inside the cell that lead to the production of melanin. If you're a dark mouse, then you have a mutation in a gene that's called MC1R that changes the structure of the receptor. So this molecule, the double helix, is DNA. DNA constitutes instructions, and those instructions are for making protein. If you are a brown mouse, then you have instructions for, let's call it the normal receptor. If you're a dark mouse, then you have, in the case of the rock pocket mouse, 4 mutations, 4 changes in the instructions. The instructions are encoded in a system of chemical letters. And those chemical letters are slightly different in the dark mice, and that leads the receptor to be modified. Now, I've represented this here for ease of use just as a different color. But the thing to know is that it's actually a slightly different shape, which means that this will respond to external signals differently, and it'll induce changes inside the cell differently. So here's a schematic view. And again, just to connect that to what we were talking about before, different DNA is going to lead to different RNA, a different message, and that'll lead a particle in the cell that's called a ribosome to translate a different kind of protein. So just to jump back, that's what we've got going on here. Different DNA leading to different protein. Different DNA leading to different protein. Light-colored mouse, dark-colored mouse. So that is where we're at right now, and I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. If you do, you can put them in the comments. Now would be a great time to take a little pause and see if there's any clarification that anybody needs about anything that I've taught about so far. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything, but maybe something will come in later, and there's always a little bit of a lag. But again, just to review, mice that are lighter colored, adapted to live on a light-colored substrate, have DNA that produces light-colored melanin. It's actually called pheomelanin or pheomelanin, whereas if you're a dark-colored mouse, you have several changes in your DNA that leads melanin production to be slightly different, and that leads to the production of eumelanin, a darker variant of melanin. So these mutations come about randomly. They can be caused by a variety of factors, but the important thing is that organisms don't plan mutations, and the mutations don't arise in response to any need that the species is having. They just emerge randomly. So in mice that live in these light areas, you have the light form of melanin. In mice that live in these dark areas, you have the dark form of melanin. How did it come to be that this entire population wound up being dark colored. So now we're really talking about evolution. And the question, again, is how would a gene is a sequence of DNA that codes for a specific protein, how would that change? And that change occurs through a process that's called natural selection. So let's think historically about how this would have happened. You have mice that are living on the original light-colored substrate, and there's a lava flow. Well, the mice are going to, after the lava flow becomes vegetated, they're going to want to look for food in that area. But when the light-colored mice venture out onto that lava flow, they're going to be in big trouble because when they get there, they'll be seen by visual predators, which will eat them. They'll destroy their DNA. They'll destroy their ability to produce that light-colored pigment. But a dark-colored mouse, will have an advantage in that context. It's better camouflage. So it will have an ability to persist and pass its genes on. Let's again connect this to some of the molecular biology we've talked about before. On a dark surface, this DNA instruction is really a bad instruction because it tells you to make light-colored melanin, and that is a recipe for being eaten. But this DNA instruction with these mutations actually are useful. They produce a phenotype. A phenotype is a kind of appearance that promotes survival. And that leads to production of a dark-colored melanin, eumelanin, that increases survival. So you can now connect what's happening with natural selection with what's happening on a molecular level. And over time, what will happen is that the predominant form of mouse on those dark lava flows will be the dark colored mice. So that's how natural selection leads a mutation that changes the DNA so that the dark colored melanin is produced and produces, therefore, a mouse that's better able to survive in this dark environment. Let's go through the whole process of natural selection because it's a very useful process to understand as you learn about biology this year. Here's how it begins. Here we have our mice on this light-colored substrate, but there's going to be some variation. And that variation comes about from recombination and mutation. That leads to another big fact about evolution, which is that in any species, the reproduction rate is always greater than the survival rate. That's almost an axiom. In other words, if the reproduction rate was lower than the survival rate, then the species would wind up disappearing. And the idea is that in any species, more are born than wind up surviving. And what that leads to is some competition between the offspring, and the survivors have beneficial traits. Who survives? In this case, on the dark-colored rocks, the survivors are the mice that have the dark color. And if you repeat that process generation after generation, you wind up with an adaptation that spreads throughout the population. I see a question from Lynn that I want to address. And Lynn is asking, is the production of eumelanin always a mutation? In the case of the rock pocket mouse, it's good to think of it as a mutation because the original form of the mouse was light colored. In other words, think about the desert. The rocks are mostly light colored. Into that light colored rocks were lava flows that changed it. So when we think about this species, thinking about the production of eumelanin, it is correct to think of that as the mutation because it differs from the ancestral form. The ancestral form wasn't the dark color. The ancestral form was the light color into which that dark color emerged. So I don't know if I'd want to say that in other species, but certainly in the case of rock pocket mice, the eumelanin winds up being produced through a mutation. And thank you very much for that question because that's what it's all about. One idea that I want to emphasize, and I've always loved telling my students, is this. There are different instructions running around on these rocks. Those instructions are the DNA that's being carried by the mice. Well, the instructions on the lava flows to produce a light-colored mice are maladaptive instructions, and those instructions wind up getting destroyed. What destroys them? The predators destroy them. They actually eat those instructions. But the instructions for producing a dark-colored mouse actually persist. And persistence enables these dark-colored mice to find other dark-colored mice and to reproduce with them. So over time, instructions that lead to adaptive phenotypes, remember the phenotype is the appearance, those wind up persisting. And that's what natural selection is all about. It's about the differential reproduction of favored phenotypes because the instructions for those phenotypes wind up persisting rather than being destroyed. And again, it can be a very, very moderate difference in survival. But if there's a 1% difference, if there's a 5% difference, then you'll wind up seeing that adaptation spreading throughout the population over time. One thing I'll put in the show notes is that a lot of my information for this comes from research that's been presented through HHMI, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. They've got fabulous educational stuff. I'll put a link to a great video that they have about this. And I'm also really grateful to Professor David Naiman, who shared with me some information that helped me put together this video. So here's the after situation. We've talked about why. And again, one thing that I want to emphasize in general is that natural selection, it's how we explain adaptation. How did the leafy sea dragon come about? Variation, followed by selection, repeated over time. How did the SARS pandemic happen? There was variation in viruses. Some of those variants made SARS-CoV-2 viruses better able to infect cells. That led to the pandemic. And we've seen different variants. In fact, this is the term that's widely used in the news. There's a new variant of COVID. What does that mean? That means that a mutation has evolved that's created a phenotype. The phenotype in this case is the shape of the spike protein, or possibly some other things that might be happening in another part of the virus that make this virus better adapted to infecting human cells, better adaptive at therefore reproducing itself, and therefore that mutation spreads over time. What's changing with the new variant are the underlying mutations. Here's a cool mutation. Here's a cool example of an adaptation. Penguins have this cool thing called countershading, where the back is black, more melanin, the bottom is white. Why is this adaptation? Because when you think about it, penguins are both prey and predators. So an animal that was the predator of a penguin looking from above would have difficulty seeing it because it would be looking into the dark ocean bottom. An animal that was below would have difficulty seeing it because it would be looking up towards the much lighter colored ocean surface. So that's countershading. And you see this pattern in orcas. You see this in many marine creatures. So pretty cool example of an adaptation. Here are some more adaptations, and we could talk about them all day, and we will in the course of biology. So a really cool thing is that a related process has been documented on Florida sand dunes. And Lynn, in response to your question, this is kind of the opposite thing. Here's sort of the typical colored mouse, brown on top. It has a white underbody. Visual predators don't see the underbody, so there's no selection for brown color up here. So this produces plain old pheomelanin, this lighter form of melanin that produces this brown coloration. There are mice that have adapted to live on the sand dunes in Florida. The sand is much lighter in color. They have a single mutation that actually interferes with melanin production. And I don't think it would be correct to say that these mice are albino mice that can't produce any pigment, but they produce much less pigment. And that leads to the white coloration, and that is adaptive in this context. So adaptations are always contextual. They're always based on the environment in which the organism is living. So here's a cool thing. This isn't really about adaptation, but it is about variation. A mutation in MC1R also explains the difference in fur color between a black lab and a more standard colored lab. So that's also about the MCR1 protein. And I believe there's stuff like that goes on in humans as well. So the key takeaways from this lesson: adaptation is a key process in biology. Adaptations occur in multiple levels. And in this lesson, we've seen how they occur at a cellular level, a genetic level, a molecular level. Mutation leads to variation, and those variations become adaptations as they become selected by the environment. So that's the stuff to take away. And what I'm wondering is if anybody has any more questions about anything we've talked about the rock pocket mouse, or anything at all. And I'll use this as a moment to take a sip of tea and to rehydrate a little bit. Okay, let's move on. I want to take this moment to thank Lynn, because I'm assuming you're still here, and I'd still be talking to myself with no sound if you hadn't let me know that the sound wasn't working earlier in the show. I don't know if 4JCM is here too, but I'm indebted to both of you for the success of this show. Thank you so much. It's really great to have both of you here helping me out. So now we're going to move into the song of the week. And I've done a little bit of experimentation with this. I don't think that the sound is fantastic. This song is called The Ballad of the Peppered Moth. I released it on the Science Music Videos channel a couple of years ago. And the peppered moth is another example of camouflage coloration. As with the rock pocket mouse, there are two forms of the peppered moth. There's a dark melanic form, is what it's called. And there's a lighter form that has these speckles on it. In, let's call it the normal environment where these moths lived, they live in forests, and on the forest you have these growths called lichens. A lichen is a combination of an algae and a fungus. And you can see how the moth is well adapted when it rests on these lichen-colored trees. So the story is that this was well understood by naturalists, that it was camouflage adaptation. And what was noticed in the 1800s as the Industrial Revolution unfolded was that industrial pollution wound up killing the lichens on the trees. And as a result, these white moths were resting on dark colored bark, and that made them much more visible. So what was noticed was that over time, the color of the moths in these populations shifted from mostly light to mostly dark. So here's the number of light moths that were found. And you can see the numbers going down. It's going down because the tree trunk environment is becoming darker and darker, and that's making these moths into bird food. Whereas these dark moths, their numbers are getting higher and higher and higher. Why? Because as the environment's becoming darker, they are better camouflaged. What's really cool is that this process was widely documented in several parts of the world with other species, not exactly the peppered moth, but other moths as well. And when in the 1960s, the world woke up to the dangers of pollution and air quality measures were instituted worldwide, the population shifted back from dark to mostly light. So I'm going to play a little bit of a song. In some experimentation that I've done, the sound hasn't been fantastic, so I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I am going to go to full screen, which is this over here, and let's listen to a couple of verses of the Peppered Moth. Meet the peppered moths of the English woods. The forest of Manchester is its neighborhood. It's gone from white to black and back through natural selection from bird attacks. Natural selection starts with inherited variation, followed by selection of favored traits within a population. If selected pressures consistently apply in the same direction, the beneficial traits will become the norm. Is how adaptations form. Peppered moths spend their days on the trunks of trees. A Manchester bird will eat each moth it sees. Protective coloration is a key adaptive trait. A moth that stands out meets a painful fate. In 1800, that meant looking light, because lichens on tree bark made them look so white. So the light-colored moths in the population had a phenotype to avoid predation. Natural selection starts with inherited variation, followed by selection of favored traits within a population. If selected pressures consistently applied in the same direction, the beneficial traits will become the norm. Is how adaptations form. So it's a fantastic story, the story of the peppered moth. And I'm going to put a link to the actual music video, that you can find it on the Science Music Videos channel just by searching for it. And what I thought we would do now is take some time for a weekly quiz, just 1 or 2 questions. So I am going to go like this. And I'm going to click this over here. And you're not seeing the weekly quiz, but you will in a minute. Here we go. Okay. So let me tell you what we've done. We've gone to the website that I was telling you about earlier in the show. It's called learn-biology.com. I'm going to jump back a little bit. Learn-biology.com is an interactive AP biology curriculum, and natural selection is a topic that's generally taught in Unit 7 of AP biology. I'm teaching it now just because I thought it would be a great way to kick off the show. Here's the Unit 7 menu. It talks about various topics in evolution with interactive tutorials about each one. And we're going to go to the review page, and we're going to go to some multiple choice questions. And we are going to do this. Okay, so let's practice this evolution. And here's what you can do. We're not going to do all of evolution. We've just been talking about natural selection. So I'm going to deselect everything. I'm just going to go to natural selection and artificial selection, and we'll just do a question or 2. Okay, so here's our first question. And I'm hoping people can see this okay. I think it probably does work visually, but I'll read it aloud. We have a picture of 2 cormorants. There's a flightless cormorant and one that can fly. In the flightless cormorant, the wings are extremely stunted. Here's the question. The Galapagos flightless cormorant, Phalocrocorax harrisi, is the world's only flightless cormorant. It has short vestigial wings, and it's heavier than any other cormorant species. It's found only on the islands of Fernandina and Isabella. Those are in the Galapagos Islands that are off the coast of Ecuador. DNA evidence indicates that the Galapagos flightless cormorant is closely related to the neotropic cormorant. I'm going to skip the Latin name. The neotropic cormorant is a strong flyer that, like all cormorants, preys on fish. Which of the following is the best explanation for the flightlessness of the Galapagos cormorant? Choice number 1, because the Galapagos flightless cormorant lives on land and feeds in the water, and because the islands have no native predators, it has no need to fly. What do you think of that? Here's another choice. Choice 2. Once the ancestors of the Galapagos cormorants arrived on the Galapagos Islands, they went for long periods of time without using their wings. This caused the wing muscles in the Galapagos Islands to atrophy, decrease in size, and they passed this trait on to their offspring. What do you think of that? 3. An ancestor of the flightless cormorant had a mutation that reduced wing length. With no selection against shorter wings, this mutation was passed on and spread throughout the population. And finally, choice number 4, the rocky and barren conditions on some of the Galapagos Islands made them unsuitable for finding food. In response, the ancestors of Galapagos finches turned to a marine lifestyle and used their wings for swimming rather than flying. Anybody want to weigh in with a choice here? You've got choice 1, 2, 3, or 4. I will click whatever it is that you choose. What do you think? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? And if you don't know, you can do what is a perfectly good technique on a multiple choice question. You can guess. So what you got? Anybody? Option 1. Let's see. Because Galapagos flightless cormorant lives on land and feeds in the water, and because the islands have no native predators, it has no need to fly. That is true, but it's not the best evolutionary explanation. And what I'm going to do is give you a little hint here. Okay, no. While these statements about the Galapagos flightless cormorant are true, they don't explain the reduction in wing size. So I'm just going to jump to the end here. The explanation is really more like this. Think about what happened with the rock pocket mouse. There was a mutation. They didn't know if that mutation was going to be useful or not, because evolution doesn't work that way. Evolution has no foresight. But in this context, that mutation wound up being extremely helpful. So it's 3 over here. An ancestor of the flightless cormorant had a mutation that reduced wing length. With no selection against shorter wings, in other words, these birds weren't flying long distance anymore. They were still just swimming in the water to find fish. This mutation was passed on and spread throughout the population. There's actually a process by which it's advantageous, if these birds aren't flying, for them to have shorter wings, because they don't have to put their energy into actually building wings. They can put their energy into other features that make them better swimmers and better at catching fish. So it's this choice over here. Let's do one more question. I really appreciate both of you for stepping up and answering. In 1858, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace proposed a theory of evolution. Which of the following observations aided in the development of this theory? 1. An organism can lose an unused trait. 2. An organism evolves during its lifetime. 3. Some variation in a population is inherited. And 4. The environment remains constant during an organism's lifetime. I hope nobody's shy on account of the answer for the last question, but you've got choices 1, 2, 3, or 4. What do you think is most likely a part of the theory of evolution by natural selection? Put it in the comment thread. Let's see what you got. Anybody? Well, it is true that an organism can lose an unused trait, but that's not the best answer. Basically, the idea is this. Think about what happened with the rock pocket mouse. There was a mutation. That mutation was passed on to its offspring. It's about the inheritance of variation. So what happens if you get one right in this system? You get some praise. Exactly. Inherited variation is a key part of the Darwin-Wallace idea of natural selection. Let's do another question. The next question is based on the following description of 3 species of frogs. Species A, after laying eggs, provides no parental care for its eggs and larvae. Species B is preyed upon by a fish that prefers small larvae. Species C faces progressively decreasing opportunities for breeding with increasing age. Assuming that the resources available for reproduction are similar for A, B, and C, which of the following reproductive strategies would be favored by each species? I gotta say, this is a tough question to throw at students who are just starting their biology course, but let's see how you guys do. It's really about reasoning. Species A and B should produce a small number of larger offspring, and C should breed earlier in life. Second choice, both species A and B should produce a large number of smaller offspring. C should breed later in life, but increase its clutch size, the number of eggs it lays. Third choice, A should produce a large number of smaller offspring. B should produce a small number of larger offspring. C should breed later in life. And choice 4, species A should produce a small number of larger offspring. B should produce a large number of smaller offspring. And C should breed earlier in life with a small clutch size. We've got a 3 choice, and we're waiting for one more choice to come in. Anything? Okay. Fantastic. I think we've got 2 students here tonight who are going to crush it in biology this year. How fun. So I'm going to move on from this quiz because it's getting close to the time to end the show, and you folks have been incredibly patient with me. So there we go, and let's go like this. We did our weekly quiz. A quick word from our sponsor, learn-biology.com. If you or your students are having trouble with AP Bio, then I want you to know that with learn-biology.com, you'll get the skills and confidence you need to ace your biology class and the AP Bio exam. This curriculum, it's 100% aligned with the College Board's AP Bio standards, and it's been approved by the College Board as a textbook alternative for you teachers there who have to go through an AP Bio audit. The core is interactive tutorials that have readings, videos, flashcards, and quizzes that teach students everything they need to know about every topic in AP Biology. That includes multiple choice questions, click and drag diagrams, identify the part questions, free response questions. If you have a positive response, then a correct response, you get positive feedback. And as you just saw, if you get it wrong, you get hints and repetition. We didn't see that, but all those questions that you got wrong would be repeated. So at the end of a quiz, you'll know the material. It's a system that's designed for learning. There are student learning guides that tell you exactly what to do, give you practice writing and reflecting on what you're learning. You've got fantastic AP Bio exam resources. And for teachers, know that you can monitor your students' performance and you can see how well they're doing. There's a free trial that's available for teachers and for students. So go to learn-biology.com, sign up for a free trial. Anybody have any questions about anything about AP Biology, your college biology class, what you want to know, what you want to prepare for, about learn-biology.com, about the Biomania app, about me? Any questions that you want from this experience that we've had together tonight? Anything goes. All right. Well, listen, maybe not tonight, but maybe what will happen is there'll be questions that come up. You can always email me. You can put questions in the comments. And here's a plan for this week. If you want to get started with learning biology, then what I want to encourage you to do is go to learn-biology.com and sign up for a free trial, and then go to our course introduction. You'll see this menu here, And if you do this tutorial, AP Bio, themes, big ideas, you'll get a great review of natural selection. This is also foundational stuff for your course, understanding topics like properties of living things, structure determines function, levels of biological organization. It'll set you up for success in your course. So I want to emphasize that, we just finished the Olympics. All of those folks who got gold medals, they worked every single day. And if you can be disciplined enough to work every day on biology, not a lot, 20 minutes, you will get the practice that you need in order to really understand the difficult concepts that make up biology. Biology, it's fantastic. It's also tough. It's also super challenging. So spend the time, you'll get there. And wherever you are in the course, there's a tutorial that's waiting for you. There's resources that are waiting for you on learn-biology.com that are really going to help you. I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight. We'll see you next week. I'll be here at 6:30. I promise that I'll have the sound on at the beginning of the show for those of you who are patient enough to be with me. Please subscribe and watch the next video that's going to come up. I want to thank you so much for being with me tonight. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Lynn, for being here and also for giving me such great feedback. See you all next week. Bye, everybody.